Alright, welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I got a little small video for you. I'm going to be changing out the Supercharger pulley bearing on my SRT6. Now, it just so happens I have the Supercharger out of the car due to me doing some other stuff. But this same concept applies if the Supercharger was in the car. It'd actually make it a little bit easier, especially when pulling off this Supercharger pulley housing. But yeah, same concept. You got a 12mm nut right here, which needs to be removed. Be careful because this bolt is a hollow bolt, so when you go to tighten it back up, it can strip. And keep in mind, when you go to take it off, the actual housing as well as the rotor and the clutch, everything will spin. So we'll be using a electrical impact. You can also take the serpentine belt and put around it to hold it, or like an oil filter wrench or a strap wrench, where you just slide it over and you can hold tension on it while you take it off. Also wouldn't hurt if you're doing this in the car, just to go ahead and leave the serpentine belt on, at least until you loosen this bolt. Once you loosen this bolt, you can take the serpentine belt off. It'll have to come off anyways, and after that you can just simply pull this washer up, and then there will be this snap ring right here, which you will need snap ring pliers, which looks something. I didn't put them up now, but snap ring pliers, you can get them at any auto parts store, or even I think you can get them at Lowe's. But if you don't have any, you could always make do with some needle nose, maybe some needle nose, or a pick, or maybe a flathead, two small flatheads. But all you gotta do is just pinch those together and it'll simply lift out. But keep in mind, if you do that, these are under a lot of tension or pressure, so you do run a chance of it going flying, which sometimes they can be really hard to find, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that's all to get the actual housing off itself. Then you can simply pull it off. This is where having it in the car will be more beneficial than me actually having it out of the car, because with it being bolted to the motor, you can just simply pull towards the front of towards the radiator of the front of the car, and it'll slide off. Whereas mine's off the car, so I had to literally lift it up, lift the whole Supercharger and intercooler up by just the pulley housing itself. Just lift it up. I had some trouble getting it off, so I soaked it in some just sprayed some WD-40 right in here, as well as in here, this crack between the housing and the magnetic clutch disc or whatever, and the actual clutch itself right in here. This is where it'll separate right here. So it will not separate right here. It's just between the actual clutch itself, which is this, and the actual clutch disc material, or clutch disc, which is this piece right here. That's where to separate this little seam right here. So yeah, just a lot of WD-40, let it soak, or some PB Blast or anything like that. Let it soak. If that doesn't work, you could try tapping this rim with a rubber mallet. Just be super careful, but you can just lightly tap around the actual rim of the housing itself, and it'll loosen up. I don't suggest trying to pry between those two. That just does not seem like a very good idea. You can also some say you could heat it up, but I didn't have to resort to that. Yeah, try to save that as a last resort, because it could cause damage to that bearing. But if you're replacing the bearing, no big deal. I don't know how it will affect the clutch itself. It could burn the clutch up or something like that. But yeah, it simply comes right on off, and yeah, let's get to it. One thing to note about pushing or pressing the bearing out or pressing the bearing in. To press it out, you'll be pressing from the back side to press it out of the housing, and to press the new bearing in, you'll be pressing in from the front of the housing. Yeah, because it's got this little stop ring. But yeah, here's just a small side-by-side comparison of the old bearing on the left and the new bearing on the right. They're both NSK bearings. I'm not for sure if they're OEM or not, but yeah, NSK Japan, both the same outer diameter, So yeah, as you can see, this bearing is pretty worn. This one didn't make any, well, you can hear it a little bit. It didn't really have too much play in it, just a little bit. Well, I can't, yeah, it ain't got hardly any play in it. But I'm gonna go ahead and change it out because these are wear items. So yeah, it spins pretty freely. But I'm gonna go ahead and change it out. Since I had the supercharger apart, changing the water pump, I might as well go ahead and change the bearings out. A little preventative maintenance. And plus this one is pretty worn, as you can see. So yeah, I'll go ahead and clean the new bearing up, grease it down, and press it back in. Alright, one thing to note when pressing the bearing out, as well as when pressing it in, I made the mistake of putting my press blocks along this outside edge, which is, there's springs in there, as you can see. All it did was press the actual housing away from this magnetic plate, or the clutch plate, or whatever you want to call it. As you can see, it pressed it out and deformed those springs a little bit. So press on this inside portion because it is part of the actual pulley itself, whereas this is just a riveted on plate for the clutch. So yeah, keep that in mind. Now the way that I'm going to remedy this problem is it's not bad. None of the springs broke or nothing. It just slightly bent them out. But when we go to press the new bearing in, I'm just going to place this on a flat surface. That way, as we press the bearing in, it'll actually apply tension like so, and hopefully compress those springs back down. If not, it shouldn't be no major problem. But yeah, it should compress those springs enough because it's supposed to be right in there gap wise. So we spread it out pretty bad. But my mistake, my fault. Learn from it. Do not make the same mistake. Press on the actual pulley, or yeah, the pulley housing itself, and not on the magnetic or the plate for the clutch, riveted on clutch plate or whatever. But yeah, all right, let's get to it. We got our new bearing. I gotta grease it up, then we'll simply just place it on top. Find the seal driver that fits it the best, and we will begin to press the new fitting or new bearing in. Yeah. Alright, another little hack is you can use the old Supercharger pulley bearing to drive in the new one. As you can see, I just used the oversized seal driver on top of the old bearing. But keep in mind to stop using this bearing once you get close to the housing itself, or you'll run the risk of actually pressing this bearing partially into the housing itself. So now once that I've got it all even, because that's one thing with the seal drivers, is it's not exact fit. As you can see, it's putting more tension on the actual inside of the bearing right here, opposed to putting 100% pressure all the way around and evenly across the bearing. Whereas this old bearing matches the same outer diameter, so it puts all that tension directly on this outer race. So now that we got it almost in, we'll switch to our smaller seal driver, which fits pretty good, and this is a 50 millimeter, so probably a 51 millimeter would probably fit perfect. As you can see, it's not 100%, but it works. So now we'll go ahead and drive the new pulley bearing all the way in. Alright, now that we've pressed in the new Supercharger bearing, pulley bearing, you can look on the back to make sure there's no cracks or gaps between that retaining ring, that little lip you see, and the actual bearing itself, which there is not. I've lightly greased the inside bore of the Supercharger pulley that's actually going to rest on the snout, and I've also wiped down the snout really well, get off any debris or anything like dirt or anything like that. I've applied a light amount of grease, just all general purpose grease, to the actual snout that the Supercharger pulley will sit on. Be careful not to get it towards the base, and if you get any on this material, this actual magnetic clutch disc for the Supercharger, make sure to wipe it off. You can spray it off with a little parts cleaner or brake cleaner. Now that everything is all copacetic, we should now be able to put the new pulley on, or put the pulley back on. Might take some hit. Might have to hit it with the rubber mallet. If you don't have a rubber mallet, you could use maybe a towel and a hammer or something like that. But we're just gonna simply tap it on. Just be real easy. I'm gonna tap it on, as you can see. It slid right on nicely. And now we have no noticeable gap between the actual clutch and the supercharger clutch, and yeah, there we go, and the actual disc itself. So everything is back on. Everything looks super good. Got a lot of grease. I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off this excess grease right on this front side, and then we will simply put this washer, which I've already wiped off, and this 12mm bolt back on. Now to put the washer on, if it is the factory little washer or whatnot, it should have, see that white mark at the top, and then there's a blue mark at the bottom. They're both torque paint for torque specs. So on the factory, once they torque them down, they put a little mark. But all you'll do, and as you can see, it's got a nice little, not nice, but it's got a little seal on the back, so keep that in mind. Seal always goes face down, and you'll just line up those two little holes with the two little holes on the supercharger snout, and then you'll put your 12mm bolt in, and last thing you'll put in is your seat clamp or snap ring, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's all there is to it. One thing to note about this bolt, it is hollow, and when you go to tighten it down, do not tighten it too much because it can snap or strip with it being hollow. This one is a 12mm. On some of the other Mercedes, like the SL35, I think it is, they are a lot bigger bolt. I think it's a 24mm. This one is just a 12, and I don't know where I put my 12mm socket, but this gets torqued down. I'm not sure the exact torque value. I think it's like 22 or 12 Newton meters. It's a very small value. I'm just gonna go with the rule of thumb. We'll just crank it down, not crank it down, we'll just finger tighten it, and then we'll snug it up with a ratchet. Be super careful, do not break that off. So just go light with it. And that, well, I gotta put my snap ring back in, and this will be good to go and ready to throw back in. Alright, now that I got my snap ring in, there's no specific orientation. I mean, it's a snap ring, so you ain't got to worry about a specific orientation or nothing like that. Be careful when putting it in. If you're using the snap ring pliers like I have, or just in general, because once you put some tension on them, they can and will go flying, and they can get lost like that. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, keep that in mind. Maybe wouldn't be a bad idea to be in a somewhat open environment, clean open environment. That way, if they do go fly, it does go flying, you can relatively easily find it. But yeah, now that I put it in, all I gotta do is tighten down this 12mm supercharger, the center bolt, and it is ready to throw back in. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.